I want to start out with a story this morning about a nice little minister's widow. There was a nice lady, a minister's widow, who was a little old-fashioned. And she loved the outdoors and was planning a week's vacation in California at a Yosemite campground, but wanted to make sure of the accommodations first. So uppermost in her mind were the bathroom facilities. But she couldn't bring herself to write toilet in a letter. So after considerable deliberation, she settled on bathroom commode. But when she wrote that down, it sounded too forward. So after the first page of her letter, she referred to the bathroom commode as BC. Does the cabin where I will be staying have its own BC? If not, where is the BC located? Is what she actually wrote. So the campground owner put the letter on the desk of his senior staff member without noticing that the staffer would have no way of knowing what BC meant. This is not looking well. So then the owner went off to town to run some errands. And so the staff member came in after lunch, found the letter, and was so baffled by the euphemism, he showed the letter around to several counselors, but they couldn't decipher it either. The staff member's wife, who knew that this lady was the widow of a famous Baptist preacher, was sure that it must be a question about the local Baptist church. Of course, the first staffer exclaimed, BC stands for Baptist Church. And so he sat down and wrote, Dear Madam, I regret very much the delay in answering your letter, but I now take the pleasure in informing you that the BC is located 9 miles north of the campground and is capable of seating 250 people at one time. I admit it is quite a distance away if you are in the habit of going regularly, but no doubt you will be pleased to know that a great number of people take their lunches along and make a day of it. They usually arrive early and stay late. The last time my wife and I went was 6 years ago, and it was so crowded we had to stand up the whole time we were there. It may interest you to know that right now there is a supper plan to raise money to buy more seats. And they are going to hold it in the basement of the BC. I would like to say that it pains me very much not to be able to go more regularly, but it is surely no lack of desire on my part. As we grow older, it seems to be more of an effort, particularly in cold weather. So if you decide to come down to our campground, perhaps I could go with you the first time, sit with you, and introduce you to all of our folks. Remember, this is a friendly community.
Oh, man.
We can mess things up when we're not clear, can't we? That is one of my favorites. I have been waiting for 3 years to tell you that joke. So, here we are. And it's good for us to laugh. And I want to say something right off the bat to you. I know that this conversation of braving the wilderness has not been the most lighthearted and carefree. I know it hasn't. And I just really want to acknowledge you for your courage and your willingness to be in this conversation. Because, man, we are in some interesting times, aren't we? Yeah, we are. So this week, we're delving into Brené Brown's wisdom about how to speak from our hearts in the midst of what feels like a storm of negativity and separateness swirling around us. What is ours to do? Well, Brene says we get to learn how to speak civilly to nonsense, and she used a different word that has a B and an S in it, that we're going to call it nonsense. Nonsense is what people say to take a position that's not based in fact, but in the need to be right. And I know nobody in this room ever does that. So when we're dug in and we're being right, there's no curiosity. No one asks questions to learn about what someone is saying, because asking questions can be interpreted as weakness and antagonism. There doesn't seem to be a quest to know the facts beyond the stories and sensationalism of what we're hearing. And what's really interesting that we're starting to hear more of is this either-or conversation. You're either with us over here or you're against us. Have you heard that at all? There are only two sides and nothing in between, right? So you're either a Republican or a Democrat. You're either for guns or against guns. You're either for the police or against the police. You're either saved or you're going to hell. Ever had an interaction like that? Yeah. And that can, can that really charge us up? Because there's no room there. And if you think about literally all of the most heated issues right now on the news and in social media, this conversation, this all or nothing conversation, seems to raise its head. And this is called a false dichotomy. It's false because what we know, life is not this or that, right? There's a lot in between. But boy, I tell you, does it ever take courage, and this is what she calls the wilderness, to step in the middle of that false dichotomy conversation and say, what if that's not true? So challenging this, yes, is an opportunity for us to know who we are and to have some tools. So it's often easier to forget the facts. It's often easier to forget that when we are talking about something that we're really passionate about, and we're clear, we're right, it's difficult, it can be, to see the other person's point of view. And then if we can't see or hear that other person, all of a sudden they no longer are a person. They're an object that we get to conquer and change. So in our Wednesday night classes, boy, are we just having a ball. Right? Yeah, good. So what we did this past week that I just want to share with you, and I'm not going to share the individual experiences of folks, but we kind of delved into this false dichotomy conversation. And what we did was we got in groups of 4. And one person read a situation, like, that we hear about, like the Second Amendment fear, or whatever. Or we had one situation of a coal miner in West Virginia really hoping that coal jobs would come back. Those kinds of things. Things that we hear about. And we had someone assigned to be in that space of false dichotomy. You're either for guns or against guns, or you're either this or that. And it was so interesting what we noticed. What people notice is how easy it is to be in that false dichotomy conversation. Because there's just either or. There's no possibility to consider. It's more work to consider possibility. And how frustrating it was for people that were trying to hold space or that were trying to navigate the conversation the way Brene is getting ready to teach us. using empathy and curiosity and generosity. Curiosity. That's when we care enough to ask a question. We care enough to know when somebody, and folks, I just want to say a little side, this is not just about a political conversation. Yes, it absolutely will support us in what's going on in our world, but this also translates to our personal lives. So as we go through these tools, I just invite you to pay attention to how you can also use this in your personal life. Because sometimes there are people in our life that are either or, that maybe we're married to, or we're friends with, or we work with. Yeah. So curiosity is asking questions with an earnest desire to know. It's not to egg someone on. It's about asking, is this really, where did you first hear this? Where did you first see this? What about this really stirs you? And then being willing to generously listen. And that can be a tricky part, right? Because have you ever had the experience when you're sitting across from someone and you're both really passionate about what you believe, and they're talking, and you look like you're listening, but you're over here figuring out what you're going to say next. You're figuring out your argument. And that's not listening. And people can tell, because although you might be shaking your head and doing this, there's kind of this vacant look. Yeah, right. Oh my God. Yeah, so listening and watching our body language and watching our eye contact. Open body, open heart. And she talks about generosity as creating that space for dialogue and allowing everyone's voices to be heard, allowing people to be seen. And then she talks about empathy. And I looked up in Psychology Today, and Psychology Today says empathy is the experience of understanding another person's condition from their perspective. Being willing to walk in the shoes of another. And, it's not easy. It's not the easiest thing to do to put yourself in the shoes of someone who sees separateness and fear. It's really not, folks, especially when that's not your heart. But remember what we talked about last week? That when you're around someone that's filled with separateness and fear and anger, what we know, what Brene is teaching us is instead of seeing the hatred, instead of interacting with that, to go deeper and to know that what is generating that is great pain. See their pain. And we're all on this journey, and we're all, working with our stuff. And to remember that we are biologically wired for connection. And folks, when we are not in that experience of feeling connected, can you imagine, given that we are biologically wired to be that way, how much that hurts inside? Not to feel that? To be pushing people away with your energy of hatred and anger? And remember the story that Brene talked about, the man whose wife was killed by the terrorist in Paris, and he wrote that open letter on Facebook and said, "You won't have my hate." He wasn't talking about he had hate that no one could have. It was like, I'm just not going to hate you. Because folks, that hurts us. Hate hurts the hater. And so Brene goes on to talk to us about creating healthy boundaries, that in any conversation that you're in, you never have to be abused. You create a healthy boundary, a healthy space. And to hold yourself accountable, hold ourselves accountable to be civil and mindful of the emotions that are surfacing. It takes a lot of present moment awareness, folks, to be in these conversations. And that's why we practice it most every week in meditation. It's a skill that we can build. And to stay in our integrity, admit when we're wrong. Admit we might need to learn more things. And she talks about non-judgment, to let go of judging others with a superior attitude that can come across as shaming, because people know when they're being judged. And I'm reminded of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount when he talks about judgment. And he says, "How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' while there is still a beam in your eye? First take the beam out of your eye, and then you will see clearly how to support your brother." Ouch. Jesus can just kick us to the curb, can't he? Yeah. So in other words, let's check in with ourselves before we judge or speak out to change others. It's probably a good idea not to be in a conversation with another person that has a different view, committed to change them. How does that work for us? No, what if we could just be about accepting them? And to be gentle with ourselves, folks, when we can't. Generosity. What's the most generous assumption I can make about the person in front of me? What's the most generous assumption I can make? They're doing their best. What came to mind for me is my mama is 88 years old, and she is in an assisted living down in North Carolina. And y'all, sometimes my mama says some things that I just go, ugh. They're not exactly politically correct. All right? And, my mom is 88 years old, and there is not going to be a lot of change there. And the people around her they just love her, and they just say, "Oh, Miss Shirley, you're just so cute." But her daughter, I just feel like I'm like, "Mama." What's the most generous assumption I can make? My mom is just being my mom. In her own authenticity. This is just who she is. And I get to just love her and appreciate her. So, all right, folks. We're being called up. You're being called up. And what I want you to hear, please, please, Brene is calling us up to a mighty work. And I know that we're all capable of learning how to be, in these kinds of conversations that are difficult. And I also want to remind you to be gentle with yourself when you feel like maybe it's just not yours to do. It's okay. We're all learning, we're all growing. So, this week, are you ready? This week? Okay, let's try this out. So, and again, this is not just the political conversations, this is in your life. Let's do some toe touching with this, of speaking with empathy, curiosity, and generosity. Now, if it is a political conversation, I invite you to not get on Facebook and go toe-to-toe with someone that is really the antithesis extreme opinion of something. I invite you to maybe go online and listen to someone that you can turn off very quickly. Yeah, that you can navigate, put yourself out there and see if you can listen. See if you can be in that energy and hold your center. Not the most extreme, be gentle, okay? And to try this on if there's someone in your life, maybe not Uncle Elmer who has racist, opinions. Don't go there first, okay? Just work with this on a smaller level and see if you can navigate this and work with this. Because, folks, it's going to serve you in your life. It's going to serve all of us on our spiritual journey. Because the world is calling for connection. And until we can talk to each other when we disagree, folks, the disconnect is going to continue to show up in our world. And we know it's not true. We know we're inherently connected. But there's some folks out there that maybe might not know that. And so what is ours to do to be the change? To stand in our beautiful, generous, beautiful hearts and be love. to speak from love and be love. So, are you ready? Yeah. Please be gentle with yourself. Let's affirm. I practice curiosity, empathy, and generosity as I speak from others from love and a willingness to understand. And so it is. Bless you.